Okay, please state your name and rating.
My name is Helen M. Howard. We're under the Seaman First Class Aviation Machinist.
Okay, and do you want to tell us a little bit background of how you got involved?
I was born in Fargo, North Dakota, and all my cousins, my family, they had men that went to the service. My dad only had 3 girls, and so I was the one that ended up joining the service. He was in World War I and was very patriotic, and we were brought up with all of the things on the 4th of July and all that. Those were big important dates, and we always had a flag out way back then.
Okay. So the paper that you filled out said that you did your basic at Hunter College.
Yes, New York City.
And what was that like for you?
It was very interesting because when my orders, I signed up and joined, and then my orders didn't come for a while because there was a mix-up on my birth certificate. And then when my orders came, it said I was to pick up 7 girls between Fargo, North Dakota and New York City, change train stations in Chicago, all cap letters, do not lose their luggage. And if I had any question, I looked for a shore patrol or a military policeman. And I thought I had the wrong orders when I left Fargo. But when I handed the papers to them, they said, "No, you're it, that's it. And you use this for the meals, you use this for your transportation, and you go to New York City." Got to New York City, there was a lady standing up there, and she had a white shirt on, a blue shirt on and a blue skirt. That was all of the uniform she had. She had a big sign and said, Navy, Marines, Navy, Army, Coast Guard. And there was some of each one of them there. And so we all got off, and that's where we started.
Was that your first time in New York?
Yes, I had been in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota.
I was going to say, that's quite a jump from South Dakota to New York.
Yeah, through Chicago. Yeah. And our train actually had a pot-bellied stove when we left Fargo.
That was the heat.
That was the heat. So,
Wow.
and then there we were tested, and we had a whole bunch of tests, and they said I did so well in the mechanics I could be a mechanic. And I laughed. And the lady sat there and flipped the papers down and said, "How does KP sound?" I said, "I'd love to be a mechanic." But I told her I only knew to use a hammer and a nail and a screwdriver and a screw. When she said KP, I knew I was headed the wrong direction. And so I went to Millington, Tennessee, which is outside of Memphis. And there I was one of the first women that graduated from that, and it's Naval Air Technical Training Center. We did our drill work. The girls would be in one group, the sailors would be in another, the young soon-to-be officers would be in another, but we did all our marching separate. And we walked on wooden planks between the buildings, and it was either muddy or sandy or awful. And if we met an officer, if we didn't step off, we got extra duty, cleaned Venetian blinds or washed windows, or swabbed the bathroom floors or whatever they wanted to do. And we finally learned when we stepped outside of this one general building that we'd go in groups of 3 and we could have 3 ways out. 1 or 2 of us would get to the next corner so we wouldn't have to step off. But they caught us coming and going. But they tried to upset us, and some of the girls got to crying and they gave up, and I'm too stubborn. So I stuck it out.
Wow.
That's cool. Then it said here that, which you talked a little bit about the discrimination.
Yes.
Then-
Our teachers were Navy men with hash marks up to their elbow, showing the number of years they were in service. They didn't want us there, and they did not make it easy. But my dad had told me just be stoic, and I learned to be very stoic.
And I read somewhere on here that at first you didn't have all of your uniform.
No, we
and it
didn't.
came to you piece by piece.
Piece by piece. One of the, we were told exactly how many socks, how many shoes, clothing that we could bring. And as soon as we got a uniform that matched that, they took our clothes away from us. We could have no civilian clothing. And that was shipped back home. So we got things piece by piece.
And then it said you had to know how to assemble an entire plane as well as gauges.
Mm-hmm. We did the planes there. We had planes that were unflyable, but we had to practice welding and putting them together and checking the ailerons, the things that come up on the wings, and be sure those are right, and if they weren't, fix them. And they taught us how to tie all kinds of knots. We had to learn plane recognition and ship recognition. Just flash, they come at you that fast, and you have to write them down what it was.
So was there a lot of like classroom work leading up to that on how you had to study pieces or parts?
Well, you had to learn. You learned to listen in class because we'd be too tired at night because we would be up and done with our breakfast at 6:30 or 7. We'd be all done ready to go to work, and we'd work until 7 at night, and then we'd go back to our bunks and collapse.
I would probably collapse too. Let's see. You mentioned here that your dad made you buy an ugly pair of shoes.
Yes, they were tie shoes. We were told to have good walking shoes, and they had to be black because we had to buy our uniforms. Our shoes had to be black, and there were no shopping trips to town to get shoes, and some of them did not bring the proper shoes, and they had a lot of blisters on their feet until they got.
What kind of shoes would they bring? High heels or some kind
Well,
of?
not such high, but dressy shoes, low-heeled dressy shoes.
Not good for walking
No.
or marching.
Because you'd march and you'd march and you'd march and you'd march. Then she'd give you the drills where you go off obliques and about face and all that.
Shoes were important.
Oh, yes, they were.
And so your dad wanted to serve but couldn't, so
So I did.
so he prepared you pretty well though for what you were
He
in.
did. He said, don't cry,
Yeah.
and it'll be rough, and just be sure you have an honorable discharge. And not a discharge for the convenience of the government.
Was it a scary feeling?
Well, so much happened so fast, you
Didn't have
get to
time to
think,
be
you didn't have time to think about it. You think, my gosh, what the heck did I sign up for? And then I just remember what my dad said, and we just went on to the next thing. And then after I left Memphis or Millington, why then I went to Alameda, California, and I could either work on the big planes, and those planes are hot when you climb in and you get out on the wing. You can't sit on the wing because that's hot because you slide down. Because the planes were on a blacktop at Memphis, and it would be 110 degrees. You could fry an egg on the blacktop. So you learned not to sit on the plane wings because those were metal, and so that would be hot. You kept moving. And then when I got to Alameda, I could either continue working on the planes or I could learn instruments, and I took instrument training.
You mean flight instruments?
Flight instruments,
Okay.
turn and bank.
Okay.
And I just saw the news this morning that there is an old World War II plane out at the airport, which I would like to go out and see.
At the Quincy?
Uh-huh.
Is that right?
Yeah, on Channel 6 I saw it this morning. And, but it was, that was
You should
not-
do that. That would just be
Yeah, our
bring back a lot of memories.
our teachers at Alameda were jewelers from San Francisco, and everybody was, the civilian employees were very well screened. and they would come in, but they taught us, and I'd had to wear eyepiece just like you've seen jewelers wear, and we had our own stamp when we finished an instrument. We'd put the wax in and we'd stamp it, and then we'd put our stamp in a locked drawer, because we didn't want anybody to use our stamp for a piece that they did that wasn't right.
Yeah. Wow.
That's cool. So there could be pieces that have only your stamp on them still.
Well, I imagine they're all dead and gone. but that's the idea.
Yeah.
And you probably all heard of the Norton bomb site.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the far end of the office I was in.
Is that right?
We didn't know what it was at the time, but we were told, do not go near that door and stay away from that. And that was near where they put the green on that you see on your clocks, so you can see it at night. And that was very, very secure there. But we didn't even go over there. We didn't know what that was. I never saw it until afterwards, after the war was over.
Wow.
But I did get 2 years, solid years of college training in the Navy. So I worked.
Yeah.
And this said your final exam was tough, so I imagine that's an understatement.
Well, yes, at Millington, or Memphis, most people would call it Memphis, we had a big, long silver table, and they had 100 parts of airplanes on it. And we had to go down and say what it was and how it was used. And if you didn't get enough right, well, you would flunk the course. I got it. But it was...
You had 100 pieces?
100 pieces. It could be part of a wing, it could be part of the coils, it could be anything. It could be just a special screw that only went in one place.
Just
And
a
then we were
screw
done-
sitting
yeah.
on the table.
And after that, then we went to a tied-down cockpit, and they gave us a scenario of, okay, now you're up in the air and the plane's going into a spiral down. We had to explain, we had to do it and get out of that spin. But it was just there, it was hooked up so we were on the ground, but our test was as though we were up in the air. And so that's what qualified. If you got through all that fast, then, like when I got to Alameda, then I was qualified to be a co-pilot. But the men did not want women in their planes. And one day, something was going on in San Francisco, and they decided a lot of people wanted to go to San Francisco because it was just across the way. And I decided I'd go try and see if another girl and I thought we'd try to get on there. And they asked us where we had ground school. Well, the gals that were over there that didn't have ground school were disqualified. The next question was, have you been in a small plane? It was supposed to be, have you been in a small Navy plane? And that disqualified some. Got to me, he said, have you been in a small plane? And I said, yes. He said, what kind? And I named it. He said, that's not a Navy plane. And I said, sir, the question was, had I been in a small plane? My uncle had it, and I don't even remember what kind it was now. And I said, I was up in the plane with him. So he had to take me past the tower, and you couldn't turn back without getting into trouble. He was that tall guy with red hair, and he had a red face by then. He was so unhappy. And I had a little box about like that, had a life raft in, because we were going out over the ocean, and the bay, and I had to have a parachute. And we walked out, got on this seaplane, it was a PBY, small coastal plane, but it was just on the coast there, 2 passenger. I got in the front, and I threw my stuff in the back, and I climbed in, and I'm not too tall, so I had a little trouble getting in, but I got in. We were up there, and pretty soon I hooked up the phones, and he pretty soon asked me some questions, and I answered them. And pretty soon he said, we'll be up for 4 hours, not 2 hours. Do you want to take over the controls? And I said, yes. And so I got to fly over San Francisco Bay.
Was that a first for you?
First time.
Wow.
It was the only time, but I proved my point. But it was quite a thrill. And then when we landed on the water, I wondered how I was going to get out, and there were little places we could put our feet. I knew I couldn't reach the floor. Back there, he said, never mind. He carried my gear back, he was an officer and I was enlisted. When we went by the tower, he checked in and called across. I was headed off the blacktop. He said I could go up anytime I saw him, just let him know and he'd take me up. But I didn't do it again. But I proved my point.
There you go.
But because of that training, I eventually married a man who'd been in the Air Force.
Oh.
And we took a lot of trips to England, to where he was based. Afterwards, his groupies were real close. And every time we'd get in a different kind of a plane, my husband said, she was a co-pilot, so I got to see a lot of cockpits. British Air and all that, and several of them said I could have gone into the cockpit. I said, no, I'll just look.
Wow, what a story.
But when we go flying, I get the window seat, and I'd still look out and see if all the rivets were in place. I just had to. And I'd notice scratches or something, and something didn't come up right. But everything else came up right.
That was your training.
Yeah.
So I love that story. What a good story. And you ended up marrying a pilot.
Well, he was a full turret gunner.
Was he a pilot?
He was, in the planes have the bubble in the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't very smart either.
Is that the gunner? Is that the gunner?
No, he's a belly gunner.
Okay.
And that pivots.
Yeah, that's a vulnerable,
Yeah, and
very dangerous job.
if you're in it and they land, you don't live.
Yeah.
But we met on a blind date. He was going to Iowa State at Ames, and I was going to Drake University. And
Wow.
so.
Two college students meet each other.
But he got his degree.
They know about this kind of story.
Yeah, he started out in ag. He was an honor student in high school. I was just an average student. He was an honors student at a little town outside of Peoria. And he graduated from high school one day, and a week later he was in college at Ames because he knew his draft number was coming up. And so he took engineering in case he got shot down or injured in the war. He always wanted to be a farmer, but he thought he'd take that just in case. Came back, but we rented a farm, couldn't afford to buy one. We rented a couple farms and couldn't find one that was what we really liked. We liked better soil than we could afford. And so then he flipped back, and because he'd have drafting, he joined a big company that builds farm buildings.
As a draftsman.
Mm-hmm. And then a salesman. And then he won lots of trips. And we'd get weekends here and there. And we had a good time.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, the rest is history.
So this also says that, once again, women experience the extreme discrimination.
It was extreme.
But it talks about how you could receive dishonorable discharge for getting pregnant. Is that what this is? So do you see a lot of your friends have to be dishonorably discharged for various reasons? Or?
No, but if they didn't like the girl, they would give them. And if they couldn't handle the work at Millington, they would give them. But a man in the same position would not get that.
What did that feel like?
It was very...
Pretty infuriating.
Yeah.
Was it also helpless? Where you
Yes.
couldn't do much about it? Was that?
You couldn't do much about it. You just learned. Well, my dad had told me it'll be rough. And you just learn to follow that through. But it is good training.
Mm-hmm. Things have changed in the military service quite a bit.
Well, it wasn't too long ago I read in the paper about the women over in Afghanistan and the mess we're in now, that the protective gears that was given to them were not suitable for them. They didn't protect the parts of their body that they should.
Women are vulnerable in a different way than men, so they had to accommodate.
Well, back to Memphis, you've seen at the airports where they have these long sleeve blue suits. Well, they were for men. We had the same amount of time to go take a potty break. It took us longer, and we would get disciplined for it. But they were men's clothing. They rolled up the sleeves and rolled up the pants legs.
A lot of your friends feel the same
At the time,
frustration.
yes, but a lot of them we just lived with it because we'd made a commitment and we were going to see it through. Yeah.
Things have changed. Well, I hope things have changed.
I hope that. Well, now the women pilots that flew, one of the things, that was a different route. They've pulled the targets for the men to practice shooting at. Men didn't pull a lot of those targets. The women pulled the targets.
Wow. Boy, this sounds pretty harsh.
It does.
It
But you
sounds
you have to be strong-willed and stubborn.
Yeah, I think you're right.
My dad was Scotch-Irish and my mother was Swedish, so I had both
There you
sides
go.
covered.
So you got to go to Memphis, New York, California. Did you get to travel anywhere else while you were?
Well, not while I was in the service, but we did have, my husband and I had an interesting thing happen. After 9/11, we went to Hawaii, but we were going to Hawaii anyway, and then 9/11 came. And we went there because I'd always gone to his Air Force things. We didn't go to anything Navy because I didn't keep track of anybody. And we were there, and it was just only military on December 7th. That's all it was. And there were reporters from all over the world.
Yeah.
And they were asking us questions. And it was really kind of a rough go. But I met, well, we would be eating and people keep interrupting us. My husband finally said, he had to have a hamburger and a beer without anybody around. And I said, well, I'd like a hamburger and a glass of wine and just sit and relax. And we walked in, so we asked at the hotel where we could go, where it would be just a neighborhood bar that nobody would know about. They gave us 5. We went in there, and there was a lady sitting at the bar with a great big hamburger, and it looked so good. And I went up to her and I asked her, I said, how's the food? She said, very good. And we talked a little bit. Pretty soon her husband came in. She asked why we were there, and we told her. And I knew there was something different. Her husband was chief of police in New York City, and they had a bunch of the policemen that took care of 9/11, and they were there on the R&R, rest and relaxation. And they said, would you like to join us and chaperone these young kids? And so we went around town with them, and we went to different places. And as soon as they were done listening to the karaoke someplace where they went go someplace, we'd go some. I talked to the women, some who'd never left their kids behind before, and all that, and talked to them. Some of them were already homesick, and they were excited. They'd been through so much. And we started talking about, somebody was asking what the badges were. These young men, you knew they were Marines. You could tell they were just young kids. They asked why my badge was different than my husband's, and I said, well, I was Navy, he was Army, and that's where I went to school. And they had just graduated from Millington, Tennessee. And I told them I went to Millington, and they just didn't think much about it because there were parachute riggers and other people there doing different things. And his husband said, tell them about the final test. And I had this big, long, silver table, and I could see about 6 or 7 young guys turn and look. And just as the music stopped, one of them said, "By God, she did graduate from our school." And when we left, those 8
I bet
young
that felt
men-
pretty good to hear
yes,
that.
Those 8 young men stood there and shook my hand.
Is that right?
And we saw them then the next day. We picked them out up by the stage, and we saw the policemen in there.
I bet that felt rewarding
It did.
from all what you had to
really-
go through.
Mhm.
Wow, what a good story.
But it was a challenge, and my dad just taught us to. You just take challenges. But you see, my dad had a business office, and I could work in the business office, and that's what I thought I was going to be doing.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit different.
My mom is 93. She's about to turn 94, and she didn't serve. She was a mom. She was stateside. My dad was in the Navy, and
Knew he was smart.
well, I learned a lot from my dad about the service.
Mhm.
But I learned, my dad has passed away, but my mom is still going, and she still talks about, because I ask her sometimes what it was like to live during that, and of course the Depression before
I remember
that.
that.
Remember the stamps, they had to ration everything, sugar and...
I remember the people coming to our house in Fargo and asking for food. And we were that's a railroad
That
town.
was a tough time.
And they came, and we always gave food to them. And if we didn't have any, and my dad would be traveling, we would send them downtown to one bar. And we'd go weekly or every couple of weeks and pay the bill. But nobody could buy them any booze. But he never gave them any money or anything, but what he asked them to do a job first. We had the best weeded garden you ever saw, and the weeds around the trees were perfect, and the sidewalk was straight, and the porch was swept. And when if Dad wasn't home, Mother wasn't feeling good, she didn't have good health, and they would go down there. They had a job to do. They were not given donations. They worked for what they had.
That whole generation, that whole way of living side by side in the neighborhood where everybody helped each other, it's a lot different now. What does it feel like nowadays compared to that?
Oh,
You still
I
you see
can
much of that?
kind of see it, but I'm not as close to it because I was right in it. Because my dad used to give, Fargo was so close to Canada. We had a lot
Yeah,
of British
that's
airmen that came after
That's
the
North
Depression.
Dakota.
North Dakota,
Cold winters.
Icy winters. And Peggy Lee's. You girls probably don't know Peggy Lee, the singer.
Oh, I know Peggy Lee, yeah.
Yeah, she was a friend of my dad's.
Is that right?
Dad's. And she would come in. I went to a boarding school because my mother was sick, and it was either my sister and I got out of the house. Our mother had to go to the hospital. Dad wanted her at home. So we would come home from school just a couple times a year. And we'd go in, and Peggy Lee would walk into the cafe at the hotel, Powers Hotel, and she would greet everybody.
This is
She
a
would
very famous person.
She would ask them what songs they liked. They would play that song. And if my dad didn't come in with my mother, she'd see him on the street. She said, "You weren't there last Friday." But she was a very personal person. She always knew everybody.
I think everybody liked Peggy Lee. Great singer.
Yes, very tiny.
Was she short? I didn't know.
She was
I didn't
tiny.
Okay.
She got very heavy as she got older. I always hoped that she would end up at the base sometimes, because I would just have to say Powers Hotel Coffee Shop, and she'd know that I came from Fargo.
Wow.
But she always knew somebody.
She always had that, whenever I saw her, it was that very appealing, approachable. She said, well, I didn't know her, but that's
She
what you
didn't
saw.
talk at you, she talked to you. She just,
Yeah.
and she sang with most of the big orchestras.
This was back when they had big bands and singers.
Yeah, real music, sorry girls. Real music.
Well, now we have, we do big band. In fact, we're going to do a concert. She's going to sing big band. She's going to sing Over the Rainbow with our big band. So, and this one plays guitar. She does recording studio. And are you a singer too? I don't know. What all do you do?
I mean, I can sing, that doesn't mean it's good singing.
We still, I have a big band.
Is that going to be here on the base?
No, it's going to be at the university on May 6th. You know who Bob Havens is?
No.
Bob Havens was on the Lawrence Welk Show, a trombone player for 25 years, and he's going to be our guest artist with our big band, with our jazz band.
Oh.
We're going to do that a week from Sunday. So be looking for the ads. It's going to be on television, a little bit of television sponsorship also. And I want, can I ask one more question about that? I'm talking about big bands. Did you ever get to see Glenn Miller or any of the traveling at USO clubs?
No.
How did that work with women?
The men got the first tickets.
Okay, I thought there was something, I didn't ever really know that story.
And
How did that work?
one came at Alameda, and he was a very famous person, but the show was geared to the men. And I got up and walked out.
You did?
I just decided I don't need this. We were told we could do that because they were not supposed to swear in front of us. And this was more than swearing. This was barroom jokes.
Oh, this was just gutter stuff.
Yeah, gutter stuff. And I got up and walked out, and I had to answer every officer that saw me. Said, we wanted a full house. Bob Hope's here. And I said, I'm reporting to my officer. And I went to the officer, told her, I said, I just took all I could take, and I decided I didn't need to take anymore.
They can't get away with that stuff anymore. The news is all over it.
And after that, you heard of captain's inspections.
Mm-hmm.
I got to take the notes and check out the fresh cookies off the tray, and I had best duty there was, because you have so many hours of work you have to do besides your job. And when I would sit outside the waiting officers' thing, if I'd get the dinner time one and they had steak, I got steak. Yeah.
What is that like? I don't mean to hog the interview here. I'm just fascinated with what is it like here on this campus now? There are a lot of men. I don't know how many women. We see interview mostly men. What is the situation like here?
I think there are 14 women. And
That's not very many.
one or two are older than I am. Mm-hmm. I'll be 90 in November.
How is the atmosphere here? Is it...
Most of them are right, but there are a few that we've had little discussions.
Is that right?
I've had discussions with.
Well, I can imagine that because I don't know how much has changed. A lot's changed, but then it's hard to change. Some people it's hard to change. My mom's talked about it.
In these two buildings, we have to walk over to the mess hall. And that caused quite a commotion because you're supposed to be able to walk in our dining room here in Anderson. You're supposed to be able to walk, pick up your tray, and bring it back to your table. Some of them couldn't do that or weren't doing it. And so things came around and they decided we were going to go over to Nielsen to eat. And some of them said they couldn't do that. But they could go over to Nielsen to play bingo.
Oh, they could do that, then why couldn't they? So you still get frustrated a little bit sometimes.
It does, yes. Because I was brought up, there are rules and you follow the rules. Mm-hmm. And that's what the military teaches you. I really feel that both the men and women should have 2 years of community service. In the high school I graduated from was from south of Minneapolis. It was Shattuck Military Academy, and the boys were on one hill and we were on the other hill, and the girls were over there, and it was an Episcopal school. And it's become an international school now. They come over from Europe to be there. But I had that little advance notice on military thing because our senior prom, they were all in dress garb, and they did the guns things and things like that. In fact, I graduated in 1940, and when the war broke out, most of the people I knew over at Shattuck had had 4 years of ROTC, so they were yanked out of college, or they went. Just the first war, they ended up Coast Guard, Army, Navy, whatever. And that's kind of interesting too, because they were in the same places that my husband was. And you think people don't know you, you would be surprised. My school of honor, you have to when you graduate now, you have to have so many hours of community service.
Right.
And some of the kids are rather wealthy. We went on my sister's brains, but these wealthy kids are out picking up stuff in the ditches, and they have to have so many hours of community service before they get a degree, before they graduate from there. And then when we went back finally to one of my honor class things, and my husband came in and said, "That must be a Dane." And I thought, "Dane? What do you mean?" He said, "It has to be a Dane." I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He said, "That man has to be a Dane." Pretty soon another man came around the corner, and that was his roommate in college at Ames, Iowa. And so they talked the same language my husband did, so my husband was taken right into my class.
You mentioned ROTC. I don't know if you guys know what that is. Officers Training. How were women viewed in ROTC? Were women allowed in ROTC?
Not then, they weren't. We were strictly a church.
And I don't think we have that anymore on campuses.
No, in fact, they stopped that at Shattuck. But
How did that make you feel that women were never allowed to do that?
back there, I didn't know any different. Because we had our own tables, and we had just 10 or 12 people in a class, and that was it. So when you went there, when you went to class, you knew your lesson, because you knew you'd get called on. And like in French, you'd sit at the French table, and the teacher was very fluent in French, and you spoke French. After the first half of the year, you had to name everything on the table in French. Or you didn't eat. You learned French real quick. And then as you progressed in class, you would speak French, and you'd have to, second year French, you had to bring something from the newspaper and discuss it in French. And that paid off. Because when we traveled, we ran into several French people. And
You had some language skills that you could use. Okay.
And I didn't think I remembered it, but I did.
Well, we're coming to the end of our interview. Is there something else you had that you'd like to?
Just wanted to know a little bit about 2009 when you got to do the honor flight in Washington, D.C.
Oh, you got to.
Yes.
and attend the Women's Military Memorial Dinner.
Yes.
We need to hear that. What was that like?
That was thrilling.
I bet
I
that was good.
signed up while I was still living near Peoria. And the lady that was going to go with me was gone. So when I got my invitation to go, I had to go to Hannibal, and I didn't even know where Hannibal was. I do have my car, but I didn't know where it was. And Tina, head of security here at the base, found out about it, and she checked with, because employees, we're not supposed to mingle, but she asked if she could drive, if it was all right, that she could pick me up in her car on her day off and take me over to Hannibal. And so we get there, and my guardian for the trip was on vacation with her family, and so they were one person short, and the two men were going back and forth. Well, the two of them would carry my gear and all that, and push the wheelchair and all that, because we were told to take a wheelchair because you'd get tired. And I said, "Well, do you know who this is?" And he said, no. I said, she's head of security at the home. And they just sidestepped right. Would you like to go to Washington next
Wow.
week? She said, yes. It looked like that on your face. So she went. And she had to check it out with her boss because Dawn, who's the head lady here, had been on the list to go for a long time and she couldn't go. She hadn't been asked.
So that opened up.
So Tina went,
Ah,
and then when
okay.
she came back, then we worked with Ray, who's in charge of the things here, and we got one on the list. She got to go the next time, but it rained all the time. But it was just wonderful.
All I've heard from that trip was nothing but excellent.
It was excellent.
Everybody that I've talked with just loved that trip.
And the people on the motorcycles were absolutely fabulous. When we came back,
Yeah.
there were 95 motorcycles on a hill
Yeah.
that saluted us with horns and the lights.
It's a big
And
event.
if we went at midnight and we came back at midnight. And they did that, and then it was suddenly quiet, and then all of a sudden, went by us one by one, honking, and there were 95 of them that took us back into Hannibal.
One of the best things that we've ever done is the honor flight.
It was just wonderful. I've been trying to urge people that haven't gone, and everybody should sign up. If you know someone who's a World War II or
Absolutely.
Korean, they say they can't go there. The doctor will okay it, and if the doctor doesn't okay it, you can't go. But if there was one person on the flight I went on that didn't get out of the plane but once, but they had a medic with them, somebody with medical training with them at all times. And when we got there, they brought the fire engines out when we got to Washington and sprayed the plane, and it's for all the servicemen. And it was the service. This is the honor flight of all the servicemen, pretty soon, and the servicewomen. And 3 of us got up and walked out. But then in one place, that individual, I don't know who she was, brought each one of us a red rose. But it was, wow.
That's a great way to end our interview right there on a great positive note. It is.
But they should go.
Yeah. We need to encourage everybody who can make that trip, and that's not an easy trip.
No, it isn't.
It's
You're
kind of
tired.
tough,
But
but it's well worth
I didn't
it.
even fall asleep. I mean, there was just so much going on. But we would stop different places. And so many service personnel, the Navy and everyone,
Yeah.
they just greeted us so nicely.
Helen, it's been a really good interview. We really appreciate everything. It's very instructive. Every time, I do a lot of these, and every time I've been doing it for about, I guess, 5 or 6 years. And every
With
time...
no practice, it only takes you 4 years to get out of college.
That's right. I'm still trying to learn how to do this.
She told me that's to say that. That's the one.
She's the one that said that. She looks quiet,
Yeah.
but she's pretty feisty once you get to know who she is.
Well, if you're quiet, you learn a lot more than if you're talkative.
That's true, because I'm pretty talkative and I
She
tend to
is.
get behind a little bit.
Thank you, Helen. We really appreciate your service.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing because I think it's very important
I think it is.
to have good training to be a newspaper person because there
Yes.
are some louses in that